Hello and welcome to the University of Southampton's English podcasts, where staff and students at the Department of English at Southampton discuss texts and tricks to help you achieve the best results you can in your GCSEs and A-levels. And today we're here with a very special podcast. Not only are we going to be discussing the play Girls Like That, which is currently on the GCSE syllabus, we're actually going to be talking to its author, Evan Placey, who is a creative writing fellow at the University of Southampton and teaches creative writing here. Hello, Evan.
Hi.
So, I thought we'd start maybe, and you could tell us through how you came to write this play. What was your inspiration? How did it relate to other things you've written?
I was commissioned by 3 theatres. So commissioned is when a theatre asks you to write a play rather than you approaching them with a play. And I was commissioned by Birmingham Rep Theatre in Birmingham, Plymouth Theatre Royal, and West. My phone's going off. And West Yorkshire Playhouse in Leeds, which is now the title of the theatre's changed. And it was a wide open brief, but it was a play that had to be able to be performed by young people in all 3 cities. So it was going to have multiple productions. So it needed some flexibility. And I went to do workshops with young people in all 3 cities. And I came in with a bunch of things that were in the news that week to see what might spark their interest. And the one area uniformly no one was interested in was feminism.
Oh.
And they felt like it didn't relate to them and wasn't really necessary anymore. And I was sitting there going, actually, I think it is really important. So because no one was interested in it, I decided, actually, that's what I'm going to write the play about. Right. The one thing no one was interested in. And so that was how it sort of started. And I started thinking about the story of Amanda Todd, who was the girl in Canada who committed suicide, sadly, after she'd been slut-shamed for a photo of hers that had gone around school of her topless. And I was really interested in how everyone put the blame on the man who coerced her into taking the photos. We can all agree he's a bad guy. Mm-hmm. But no one seemed to want to talk about it in the media or anywhere else about the bit in between that photo going around and her committing suicide. Mm-hmm. And actually the bullying she endured, because that would mean, well, we're all responsible. Yeah. And it was how people treated her, and that was a more difficult thing to wrestle with. So I just thought I'd write a play about that.
Good. And in terms of how the play looks when you see it on the stage, I mean, for me, the most kind of striking aspect of a staging is the chorus, and that's the kind of key, structural aspect of it too. How did you come to choose to use a chorus? What are other kind of decisions that led into that?
So when I started the play, I started writing it from the perspective of Scarlett, or the character who kind of becomes Scarlett. And about a week before I was due to deliver the play, I just kind of read the play and thought, it's not working. Oh, wow. Like, I can get away with this, but there was something that was just, I was like, it's not kind of delivering the punch I needed to. And I just had this moment of, it's not her story. It's the story of the girls who do this to her. And it's actually their perspective. And I thought I need to turn the whole play around. So I threw out the play and manically started writing from scratch. And there was something to me that then it really hit into that question of why we treat people the way we do, and why were we calling each other sluts, and why were women using the tools men use to oppress women against each other. And by having this chorus and telling from that point of view, it seemed to really work. And in the flexibility idea that was part of, the brief, that I had to perform different ways, I thought, there's something interesting about having a chorus where the characters are interchangeable, and artistically, each production is totally different depending on how you divide up the lines. Yeah. And that really excited me, that every time you'd see it, it would be different. And there's something about the theme of the play, about, complacency and about pack mentality that really suited this idea of a chorus that we're all coming together. And I really liked that as a form. And so that's how it sort of took root, so that you'd sort of have this group where a group of unreliable narrators, who were both taking responsibility and not for everything that happened, because no one's really sure if it was them or one of their friends.
And is that speech where Scarlett talks, is that from the original draft, or
Nothing's from the original.
Oh, wow, okay.
I think maybe the very opening of like the different words they used to put her down is from the original. But no, it was just a very different play, and it was much more naturalistic. So no. So from memory, I can't remember the speech I wrote last, because basically I wrote everything that was told by the girls, the chorus, and then knowing where those other monologues would go, and then I went and wrote the monologues that would go in.
It's kind of intimidating, the whole play in a week.
It's very unusual, and that was the first draft, and it was really because I had this deadline, because it's not the ideal, but sometimes actually, but that said, it's a week, but also years of an idea brewing and work that going, I know what this needs to be, and I know how it has to happen. And I remember I called the theatre and said, look, I have to make some changes. I didn't say I've thrown the whole play out. Can I have a bit more time? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, no, because we've already booked our trains to all meet the 3 theatres to do notes. But don't worry, it's first draft. And so I just sort of had this manic week where I basically didn't leave my house and just sat in my office writing in all hours. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned there that the I guess dramatic device of the chorus is about exploring that kind of pack mentality. And the play is very much about sort of, the girls as a collective identity versus maybe individual responsibility. And that's a kind of an interest or a technique I've noticed in your other plays, like in Banana Boys, you have like the chorus of girls, the kind of 60s pop singers or whatever, and in Pronouns, identity is obviously very important there. So how in this play did you explore that tension between collective and individual and responsibility?
Well, I think being a teen is about identity.
Yes.
To say it first, right? And I think that's why, to me, it's about the bit that I always think about my teen years, and probably most teens, is you're figuring out who you are and what you want your identity to be, and fluctuating identities, and I think it's something maybe we continue to do through life, we hope.
Yes.
And I think in Girls Like That, it was about a story of a group of girls who thought or who feel that their identity is in being part of a group.
Yes.
That there's a fear in having an individual identity. Because the one person who seemingly has an individual identity in some ways, which is Scarlett, is ostracized for it. And actually that it's much easier to be part of a group than to stick your head above the parapet. And in a way I suppose what I was interested in is how we as an audience then, in a theatrical experience, also mirror that we have a collective identity.
Interesting, yeah.
We give up, in a way, our individuality when we go sit in a theatre. If you watch a play, audiences follow trends. So you might have the one person who's brave enough to laugh when no one else is laughing, but you either have an audience that laughs or suddenly an audience has decided they're silent, and they're just silent for the play. And so I was quite interested, could you do a play where the play's about complicity in a way, and where you make us complicit in the actions? That actually, why do none of us stand up and say anything? Wow, we're listening to the story, we're laughing with these girls, because I think they're funny. Yeah. I hope they're funny and likable. And then, of course, the darker it turns, we start going, well, maybe it's not so funny. Yeah. But what's my responsibility to that? Because I was laughing with them.
Yes.
And so I think it sort of emerged from that. Whereas potentially in Banana Boys and Pronoun, for example, the chorus acts as a group against which our protagonist has to find their identity and not sort of be like the group. Even though that stops with Scarlett, in a way it's kind of the opposite here, because it's the group who are our protagonist, right?
Yes.
This group of girls are leading us through the story. Though I suppose at the end they each sort of do splinter eventually and have to find their identity, or at least they realise that the collective identity is kind of meaningless by the end. So I feel like that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but that's what writers do.
No. I mean, it was fascinating I hadn't thought of that as an audience member you have this collective identity that kind of mirrors what happens, which is really cool.
And I suppose that connection also with identity, I was interested in how much our identity is tied to things of the past. So this idea that, in the wider theme of feminism and how I began it with these young people not being that interested in feminism, thinking, what responsibility do we have to understanding what's gone before us and the battles that have been fought before us? And so that actually there was going to be a part of Scarlett only able to find her identity really by understanding the identity of her ancestors.
Yes.
And understanding, what her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, etc., what they went through to give her the rights she has now.
That's those kind of like historical interludes.
Yeah.
You mentioned just there before I go on that you see maybe the girls developing or discovering they need to develop individual identities out of that collective towards the end. Is that maybe something you'd associate with growing out of your teenage years, or is there a sort of trajectory you're mapping, or?
Yeah, I think when, and it's specific, I mean, obviously it's tied to being a teen, but it's something about school.
Yeah,
where you're in this really insular environment where those are the rules and it feels like it's inescapable, and suddenly you leave and get into this kind of big, wonderful world where none of that matters, you know, and Scarlett says that in her monologue, she was on the tube and she realizes that, like, this school doesn't matter, like, none of this matters, and of course it's so hard when you're going through it, because it does matter, in the same way, what 4-year-olds go through, if you ever watch those shows, Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds, or those shows, and, the fact that they didn't get that toy or that person didn't play with them, it means everything in that moment, and you want to say, this will not matter in the long scheme, but you can't in that moment. So I think it's absolutely part of being a teen is realizing that there's a bigger world and seeing outside of yourself.
Yes.
But part of finding your identity is, in a way, and this is going to sound negative, and it's not the way I mean it, teens are very inward looking.
Yeah.
It's very hard to start understanding other people's points of view because you're still figuring out your own. Mm-hmm. So to sort of really understand other people or care about and really see other people is something I think you develop. And I think that is what you develop in your teen years. Yeah. I hope.
Well, me too. But there is one moment, I guess, that I thought really illustrates the way, how the girls treat Scarlett as a sort of scapegoat, kind of solidifies their identity, and how maybe whether you're a teen or not, so many identities are formed by sort of, saying who is other, and you kind of define your sense against it. And that's a passage where the girls are kind of talking, and they talk about, I guess, kind of people who look by. So even if you don't actively shame Scarlett, if you're complicit, you kind of are part of it too. So I thought maybe you might read that section for us.
Sure.
It's just maybe you want to kind of just read this, and we'll talk about that in more detail.
Sure. The problem with girls like that is they ruin it for everyone. The problem with girls like that is they give all girls a bad name. The problem with girls like that is that their reputation is contagious, and if you hang around girls like that, it's not necessarily that they'll start behaving like she does. We are intelligent young women, we have minds of our own, but people will think you do, and that's worse, really. We did a history class on the Holocaust and learned about bystanders who watched, stood by, and even though they weren't performing the acts themselves, but just like being there, doing nothing, it's like they're condoning it. And this is a bit like that. Like, if I hang out with her, I'm approving of her behavior. And it wasn't planned, but we all just turn away, like turn our backs. Like a wave. All the St. Helens girls just silently turning. And I feel part of something, I feel deeply connected to these girls I grew up with. And that's really nice.
Thank you. So I just thought that was a great passage, that feeling part of someone, because it both kind of speaks to what happens in the play, but also what you spoke about the audience. It really concretizes that sense of you're a bystander. So I wonder maybe, could you talk us through that section a little bit? Why did you bring in the reference to the Holocaust? And it seems so ambiguous, the bad aspects of feeling collective, but also the good feelings. Can you unpack that passage a bit?
Sure, I'll try. Something that happens throughout the play is there's little bits of things that give us indication to what's happening in their world at school that we maybe haven't seen. Yeah. So we understand they're studying history. We have a couple of classes in the history class. So there's different references brought in. So this is one where clearly at some point they've studied the Holocaust.
Yes.
And it sort of made me giggle that she's slightly misunderstanding the point of the bystander thing. She kind of inverts it to suit her own purpose. And it was really important for me in this play that, like in any play, I think, there's not just good guys and bad guys. Mm-hmm. That we understand that even though these girls do some terrible, horrific things, we can't just say in a black and white way, oh, they're bad people. That actually, they don't go out of their way to do something just for the sake of being bad. Mm-hmm. And to understand that actually there is something really wonderful and warm about being part of a group.
I mean,
it's why we like it. It's why social media, which we'll probably get onto, which is part of the themes in the play, is so powerful, that it makes us feel part of something.
Yeah.
And even though in this way, I think part of how that moment can work is that it's both kind of beautiful visually and really harrowing that they're all turning their back on this girl, but actually understanding that for this young woman who's speaking at that moment, that all she can see is actually her feelings of feeling part of something. And often, that is why people do terrible things. And whether we're looking at gang culture or whatever it is, it's that actually we want to feel like we belong and have family. And that in this moment, actually, what's happening to Scarlett is superseded by the warmth she's feeling of being part of the other girls. And I think that's really important to understand of why these people in the play do what they do. That, again, it goes back to that thing of either you're part of the group or you're the one being ostracized. And actually, it often can feel like it's much better to be part of the group. And actually, I think throughout the play, we see other warm bits when they're younger, again, about that group identity.
And the bus.
I think, and I think... so I think it was about pulling out that feeling.
So you mentioned digital media there, and I guess one of the things that makes the play so relevant now, and probably will make it relevant for a very long time, is its engagement with digital technology and how social media kind of is changing everything. And the play was first, 2012, 2011?
I should know this. I think 2013.
2013. So, I guess in retrospect, very prescient in terms of that. So, is engaging with digital technology, was that something you consciously did, or did it come out of your workshops, or and how do you think it's transforming how people have relationships with each other, broadly speaking?
I mean, it's our world now. And I think sometimes I think probably theatre's been a bit late to the party. Because there's something about this purity of drama, and I think the idea of embracing really contemporary things like technology, it's tricky. First of all, how do you do it? How do you find ways to include it? But that's the world, especially we're writing for young people. I mean, that is how they communicate. It is how they start to find their identity. And certainly in a play which explores bullying, bullying has always existed. Some of the things these girls do is not new. It's not about now. But actually, what technology does, and I'm not saying anything new here, is it means that what used to be left at school now follows kids' homes. It's in their bedroom. Those attacks, whatever, are happening everywhere they go. And so it felt like I couldn't escape it in telling this story. And specifically, as once I had this inciting incident about a naked photo that goes viral. Again, that's something which is unique to today. That's happening in every school. In the workshops I asked, hands up if this has happened in your school, and every hand went up. And every workshop. And so it just is the world now. And so it was very conscious in that way of a decision of using it. But then I felt like formally I didn't want to write a piece which relied on literally having the technology. So of course you can do what you want in the production, it's very open, but that actually we don't need to necessarily see screens, that actually it's all through verbally how they tell us. So actually we understand the things they're posting on messages. They make the sounds of the ding and different things coming in. So I wanted to find a way to sort of have fun with that. And that hopefully also there's a pace to the play which kind of also mirrors that sense of just information always coming at you and being really quick.
And do you think the way social media kind of forms these collective identities, is that kind of, does it like accentuate that kind of normal aspect of being a teenager, or is it splintering it in different ways? How do you think that's going to pan out?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's amazing. I think we always hear the bad things, and I'd really hate it if someone said, "Oh, this is a play which is showing you shouldn't use technology," because actually I don't think that's the point. There's a version where maybe Scarlett can find safety and people who understand her through the online world in a way she's not in person. That's not the play I wrote, but it's not her perspective. And I think it can become a lifeline for so many young people who are, again, looking at identity, struggling from identity, whether that's because you're the goth kid and you want to find the goth community, or you're the LGBT kid and you want to find that community. But actually, I think it's an amazing way to make people connect. And like anything, it's people's behavior that changes that.
Yeah.
So, of course, it can then accentuate people's bad behavior because it just gives them a new tool to do the things they would do anyway.
Yeah.
So in a way, I'm going to kind of maybe back out of the answer by just saying I don't think it's really to do with technology, even though that's central to the world this play is set in. I don't know that it's really about the technology.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned before that kind of memory and different kinds of remembering are important to the play too. Because there's ways in which it sort of bonds the girls. You know, they build these collective memories, but then not being part of those memories excludes others. And then there's maybe the kind of, as you mentioned at the beginning, the kind of historical memory of feminism and civil rights struggles that maybe some forget. I don't know. How did you treat the theme of memory on the play? Individual, historical, social?
So in terms of the girls' sort of personal memories, there was something again about, which I'm constantly fascinated by, about how we treat memory as reliable when it's not. How we are, and it's a theme I sort of carried through and became much more central to the storytelling in my play Consensual. I was sort of really interested in, how the girls' memories affect who they become today. Again, in that unreliability of the narrator, people saying, well, I think this happened, or someone did this, I don't think it was me. But also finding a kind of innocence in the girls, of seeing them when they're younger, but also understanding that these messages they've been receiving are embedded in every memory, even if they don't realize it. So the way they've been told to think about their bodies and their sexualities and their identities is sort of given to them from the age of 5. Even before then, but the play only starts as early as 5. Going through, and I felt like it was necessary to understand how these girls came to behave the way they do in the present of the story by seeing the past and understanding that actually, Scarlett's exclusion was from the group started long before a photo of her went viral. That she'd already been the excluded one, and I think back to when I was in school, that there was a girl I went to school with who was very much excluded at primary, and then we got to secondary where it was much bigger, I went from a school of 300 to 3,000, but people in our year wouldn't let that girl forget that she was the excluded one, and even though she had a chance to begin again, people, still made sure that followed her. And I often think back at those memories and I think, why didn't I speak up? Like, I wasn't one of the people at the front lines of the bullying, but I also wasn't doing anything to stand up for her. And I feel like that sort of ghost of that has sort of followed me around writing this play. And I think the historical stuff to do with civil rights and history, it was about, it was about these characters needing to understand, or I guess to prop up the question I had of why were women now turning against each other. Like, I felt like I could get my head around really quickly why men had turned against women and were ostracizing women and oppressing women, but why women were doing it to each other was the question I don't have the answer for. And so that's, I think, what I was trying to understand by visiting the history. Does that make sense? The kind of collective history. I think I can't. Yeah, go on.
No, do you feel you have an answer to that question? Why do women under a patriarchal society turn against each other? How might the play help us understand that?
I don't know that I have an answer. I feel like I maybe got closer to an answer, but I feel like I often write plays about questions. Like, if I have the answer, I don't need to write about it, if that makes sense. But somehow in dramatizing it, it helps me to sort of to search for an answer. And I guess the drama to me is about an active search for an answer to those questions. But I don't have it.
What kind of finishing up, I just want to ask kind of some short questions. What questions are you searching for now? You mentioned you had a play Consensual on recently. What are you kind of writing about now?
At the moment, I'm writing quite a lot of screen stuff. TV and film. I suppose one of the things I'm interested in different ways. Everything's usually contemporary about today's world. I'm quite interested in the thing about, I'm writing quite a lot about parents and children. Maybe it's because I became a dad a few years ago, so suddenly those questions have really become central. So questions about how much we're responsible for the actions of our children, how much they're a product of their upbringing is a big question, I think, to several projects I'm writing. So both a TV thing I'm writing about parents and teenagers, a play I'm writing about gay adoption, and sort of models of families. So I think, I have a lot of questions about how we bring up children in this world, in the things we're talking about, with this technology, with the fact of, it happens in the play too, that actually their first, experience of sex and intimacy is porn, from when they're way too young to see it, and they're connecting with people we don't necessarily know because we're not controlling every aspect of what they do, and technology again has made it easier. So I have a lot of questions, I think, around that I'm writing about.
So you also teach script writing, playwriting at Southampton. What is one piece of advice you give to your students when you're teaching them creative writing?
I think probably that the piece is write the story you want to write. It's so easy to start writing, well, I think I should be writing this, or I think people want this. It's what's the story you're burning to write? If it makes you laugh, then that's enough. If it, makes you cry, if it makes you feel, it's write your truth in whatever way that is. And it doesn't need to literally be your truth. You don't literally have to be the characters, but it's what you feel, in your heart, because you have to live with this play for a long time and to get it out. And actually, if you were burning to write it, then that would be my advice. And this is going to sound really maybe cheesy, but change the world. like we're asking people to come out and spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours in a darkened room with us because we have something to say. So make it worth it. Like say what you need to say and what you want to leave people with and change the world, and maybe someone will leave that theater and you'll have really changed something in them.
And very finally, what is one piece of advice you would give to students studying their GCSEs?
I would say, wow, this is going to not be popular, but I would say, it's not the be all end all. I think, going back to Girls Like That and that understanding if you leave school and there's something different waiting, I feel like there's more to life than just the results on one test or one day. And of course, try your best, but also, your life and your world is bigger than that.
Evan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
And thank you all for listening.